Um, all right. Just make sure that I can, there we go. I'll just start off. I don't have any financial disclosures, but I am a member of the ACI Open Editorial Board. Matt has his disclosures listed here, and we will take off. So just to kick this off, there's a long history of patient-centered case reports. And this is actually a picture of one of the first ancient case reports from Egyptian antiquity. And with this history, we know that there's a lot of experience with case reports, and they're used to enhance knowledge and serve as inspiration and education within medicine, but not necessarily to generate evidence for the practices that we have. And it's a helpful comparison because a lot of patient-centered case reports take place within individual patient's care, and they might describe a rare occurrence or hypothesize and give findings that explain a pathogenesis or a novel therapy. And they offer oftentimes some sort of educational supplement and review of what's currently known. And for clinical informatics, as this field has taken off, case reports have sort of grown in practice, and they often describe the experience of a group implementing a new information system, a new digital health tool, or an informatics method. And the idea is to share that finding with the field. They too can also encompass a literature review or a review of a concept, but that might not be readily available in the area that you're trying to explain or explore. And so with that comes challenges. With that new field that we're in, it might be more difficult to actually write a case report. And part of that is because there isn't a formal definition. There's a lot of names for these types of papers, be it a case report or an implementation report, a technical brief, or notes from the field. And with that, there's not a lot of resources. Most case reports, though, similar to patient case reports, won't generate evidence to support a practice or have a p-value to present. And then I think one of the last challenges, and actually maybe most common, is that many people think that failed projects just aren't worth presenting. And sometimes that's because you put so much emotional energy and time into that project, and then you're sort of left feeling like you don't want to explore it further because it didn't work. But sometimes those failed projects are actually more helpful to other people than anything else that's readily available because they're honest and they can share real world experience. So why do we ask people to write case reports in clinical informatics? It's because they can expand exposure to different tool designs and program implementations, offering those real world examples. They can formally demonstrate and justify our time and value and help people advance their careers within clinical informatics. It offers examples for other groups to learn from and hopefully to reduce costs and improve patient care. And then this is a science, just like oncology or nephrology or any other pathology specialty. And we're asking people to move the fields, clinical informatics, implementation science, health systems forward.
Well, no, thanks so much, Claire, for setting this up. And I think just kind of different parts. And again, she laid it out really nicely. So in the same way that you write a paper or write a HMP or a case report, there are typical headers that we'll have. So in the introduction, similar setup to what you would for writing a paper, writing a review, anything. Background is what's the problem statement and why is it important? You know, why is the problem you're trying to solve worth solving? Particularly if you're going to do a technical brief or, you know, a informatics case report, why is an informatics solution needed? Like, why don't we just hire more people to fix whatever problem you have or give the patient a new medication? So, you know, explain like, why are you submitting this in informatics journal? And then study type, we'll dive into that a little bit, but like what type of, there's certain different case studies that can be set up. So what's the study type that you're outlining here? And then the second part is around context. So what are the different organizational factors that are there? I kind of just liken it to a patient's past medical history. So like, what's the context that you're operating in? Are you a large health system, small health system, FQHC? What type of software you're on, and again, what type of health system you are. Large integrated delivery network with inpatient, outpatient, all the specialties, or just like a small primary care practice. And your ability to execute what you have options to work with are going to change. So in the same way that you want to know, is this patient population that they did a study on similar to mine? Is this health system milieu similar to you know, what you're describing? Is that similar or generalizable to what other people have? Next slide, please.
Really quick, one other thing, I remember when Matt first gave me this talk, with study type, I was sort of like, what do you mean study type? And then as I started reading more, I saw examples of like, this is a pilot study, this is an implementation project, this is an expansion of a current process that's been used on a larger scale. So I think if you're looking for examples, those are maybe some off the cuff.
Appreciate that.
Here we go.
Yep. And then problem description. So that's kind of that first part. What is the problem? So really you want to capture the readers in your introduction. Like, why do I care? Is this just a you problem, or is this actually a problem that other people are facing? And then what's your objective, right? Why did this require analyst time, your time, rethinking about doing a process or putting a new process or technology in place? To Claire's point, so what's the type of study? So proof of concept is this idea of like, okay, like, let's wireframe something. Let's like actually mock it up in PowerPoint. Like, will people adopt this workflow? Implementation is probably where a bunch of most of your stuff will be. Like, someone has already kind of, you know, thought up the idea and they say like, hey, this sounds like a good fellow project. Like, what is the adoption of a patient portal, or putting a care pathway in for ortho knee replacement, things like that. So a lot of times your project will probably be like a small implementation pilot study. I would say most of them probably fall under that category. Case series, so that's kind of either you're trying things multiple times over time and learning from each time you try it, or you're putting the same thing out in multiple places. The example I always give during COVID, Stanford actually had a really nice paper where they basically talked about like, this is how we did it at Stanford's main hospital, this is how we did it at the county hospital, this is how we did it like for the adults, the kids, and the county hospital. So it's a case series. In parallel, they all did video visits, but how was it done in 3 different settings? So those are the types of studies. And again, it's different than like running an RCT. And again, why was a informatics solution needed? So think about like key informatics concepts. That's something you're learning now, you know, as a first year or second year. Is this clinical decision support? Is this, you know, alerts, BPAs? Is this just adoption? So like the whole idea of like adoption models and things like that. So what's the key informatics concept? Again, things that you're looking at on your board review or in your courses. How does this tie back to that again? Because you're most likely going to be submitting to one of the informatics-based journals. And then have like a hypothesized outcome before you're doing it. I think it's one of those things where it's like, we just tried it. I guess that's interesting, but it's like, we thought this was going to happen, this did or didn't for these reasons, is a stronger problem statement. Claire, anything else to add? Or yeah, again, things that you've done?
I'll say, so for one of the papers that I recently submitted, we, in our introduction, we spent some time talking about the different outcomes with paper checklists and why those don't really work super well compared to maybe like digital or like data visualization tools for checklists. So that might be an example of like why an informatics solution was needed, is like, we know that paper checklists fail. Maybe data visualization techniques will work better instead. Just as like one off the cuff.
Cool. Next slide. And then context, like I said, so again, I love this points to Claire, but it's different from a case report, right? So past medical history is the patient's context, you know, what other comorbidities that they have, but really contextual factors have the greatest effect on success. So it's again, like, did you have are you on Epic versus Cerner? All those different things make a difference if someone else wants to replicate and or see like, was your solution applicable to their current situation. People and culture, governance structure, all of these things to kind of touch on in the context portion of the paper, super helpful. And then external influences. So like, was this influenced by governmental policies? I guess I do a lot of virtual care, so telehealth, right? During COVID, that was the context to be a relaxing of the cross-state boundaries. So like telehealth took off a lot, but mentioning that in your context is kind of important, or what state you're in, and if one state versus another had more or less relaxing of the laws and governance. So context important. Yeah, Claire, anything else to add from your end?
No, I think the COVID example is perfect. I think like maybe expansion of Medicare and Medicaid for the states that didn't adopt, and maybe why like that's a different outcome could be contributory to the context. But I think you captured it really well.
Cool. Next slide. And then developing your methods. Yeah, this is one where it's hard because again, it's very different than traditional studies that you've probably did or worked on. So yeah, work backwards. It's kind of you can retcon most things. So like pick the theme that you want to have and then work backwards from there. Describe the process that you took. So was it a design process? Did you do stakeholder interviews? These all matter, right? It's kind of the different again, did you take the temperature of the different contexts and stakeholders in the solution that you put together? Different subheadings, and we'll show some specific examples to help illustrate that. And then yeah, detail the wins. So it's kind of like, what were you moving towards? What were the interim wins that you might have had? And a lot of this is greater understanding of what was the process that you took to set up, again, an implementation project or a design project. How reproducible is this? So if someone wants to take it, it's like, oh, wow, that was a great idea that they basically kind of redid a paper checklist and did it as a virtual or as a web-based visualization. Can I try and do that, in my in my health system? So having a detailed enough method section kind of in the same IKEA way, can you reproduce what someone else did in another place? And again, it's not like you have to have like a step by step, but like the reader or the reviewer should be able to read through and be like, okay, like that sounds like that would fly, or this sounds like this wouldn't work in my institution for this reason or another.
Yeah, so the only thing that I'll add is like, from an informatics perspective, you're often going to need to be describing the actual intervention or the tool that you guys developed, as well as like how you chose to study it. I think like in a lot of sort of traditional research, you're going to be describing the methodology of the analysis, but not necessarily describing the methodology of how you built an intervention tool. So that might be something that is like a larger section of the methods of the manuscript compared to maybe more of like a standard like bench research project.
Oh, and then before we move on, let me double check here. Ajay just had a quick thing. Would concept and implementation features and execution be sufficient to report for novel projects, or is robust post-implementation data measuring impact required to be useful to others and publish? I'm actually going to probably park that for a little bit because we're going to talk through results and how to, and because sometimes your results is the process, like what did you do to build it? So yeah, actually let's put a pin in that and we can move forward with that. I think we'll touch on it shortly.
Well, I might also say it kind of depends on what problem you're trying to capture. Like, is this a proof of concept? In which case, like the concept and the implementation features are probably going to be enough, versus is this like an implementation study, in which case like you are going to need like an impact assessment. So describing what kind of problem you're going to be tackling makes that should answer that question, Ajay. So one of the things that was the most foreign to me, and which is why I have this like very old-fashioned, like classic important star, is because frameworks versus guidelines was a bit foreign or challenging for me to wrap my head around. And there's many of them. This is commonly a strategy that's explored within the method section, but not often laid out as like, we use this conceptual framework versus we are adhering to these reporting guidelines. And so I really wanted to spend some time parceling them out so that they are familiar to you and that you can sort of agilely use them for your manuscript. So conceptual framework it's a concept. It's a purpose or a central focus, and it gives you a starting point. Re-AIM and CFIR are some really common ones that studies use, but it sort of gives you an idea of what your paper is going to be tackling. With these, not all elements are mandatory. And again, we'll see some examples later on in the talk, but it's going to be, we're going to explore the culture. We're going to explore how implementation worked. Reporting guidelines, in contrast, are a discrete checklist of requirements. They provide design and writing points to plan for as you're exploring your study. And some really common ones are the I checked, which is new, and also like a growing requirement for different journals like JAMIR. And then Squire 3.0, which is a little bit more classic, as you can tell by the 3.0. So ran through some examples of each. Conceptual frameworks, big concept, how we are implementing in a public and behavioral space, how we are exploring different dimensions of implementation of an HIT system, how human factors accounted for this project, implementation theories for our new data visualization tool, as opposed to reporting guidelines, where we're going to explore the problem statement, our budget, our reports, our results, and our exact findings. So it's much more structured, and it describes really how you're going to write your manuscript. Squire, this should be a 3.0, but there is a 2.0 as well. This actually is pronounced I checked, which is convenient, and it's described in the first sentence. And then Matt is our case report checklist expert, and we joke that he has the Sakumoto and Nielsen guidelines. And for me, this was like one of the first papers that I found really helpful for getting a sense of what clinical informatics case reports could look like. And so I think as a starting point, this is very digestible and worth checking out. But diving into conceptual frameworks just a little bit further. We're actually going to skip over that for now. I'm just kind of recapping, and we'll go to more examples later on in the talk. But conceptual frameworks, did you acknowledge or explore any particular big concepts? Reporting guidelines, did you use an established design methodology? Did you meet those specific requirements?
And actually, before Claire, and we can definitely circle back. We intentionally built this to have time to have some discussion. Would you mind going back one slide?
Yeah.
I guess of the alphabet soup that we put together, did any of that sound actually familiar to anyone from before? So Re-AIM, CFIR. I'm just kind of curious, like what fellows' prior experience with any of these are. And I'll be honest, I think none of these going into.
And I don't think it's I don't think it's standard for fellowship programs to actually be covering these in any huge amount of depth, because there are so many, and so you sort of just like pick and choose as you like, which makes it another challenge. Let's see, we have some comments.
Seems like new. Like I said, I made it all the way through fellowship, knew none of these, and then when I started toying around with this idea of putting together a checklist, then I realized there's all these things that are out there. So, okay, cool. I just wanted to get the temperature from the room. A lot of these come from the implementation science field and quality improvement field, probably for the most part.
And for me, like when I met with Matt for the first time, we sort of dove into some of these, and I was like, oh man, I have to screenshot this for later, because, you know, if I'm going to be implementing a new HIT system, like, then CITIGS is the one that I want to use. If I'm going to be implementing a new tool in my MICU, maybe CFIR is the one. Or maybe I want to do both, like use CFIR to explain the idea of an implementation project, but as I do it, I'm going to lean on iChecked so that I cover every component of what JMIR wants me to.
And to answer Jacqueline's question directly, are these required for submitting to informatics journals? Again, it's not required. The way I describe it, at least, is like you kind of have like that third-year med student that like tries to do a SOAP presentation for the first time and they're like all over the place. And then you kind of teach them like, oh no, if you adhere to like the SOAP format, we're expecting to see things at certain time points and hear things that fall into certain categories. So if you start to use some of these frameworks, they're accepted, and it signposts a lot better, again, for the reviewers as they're looking at it, or the editors as they're looking at it. Yeah, Claire, I don't know, thoughts from your end too, just wearing your
Matt, I think that Tiffany had said that JMIR, or at least the group that she's an editor for, was going to start requiring iChecked for their technical briefs. So I think if I were just starting out, I'd probably use the Sakumoto paper as like get a lay of the land for what reporting guidelines might look like. I'd check out the iChecked DH, which is like a quick paper to skim because it's going to feel very familiar to how like a RCT paper should look. And then I love Squire, as Jay sort of mentioned, but definitely, like, I think I haven't seen any people say like you're required to use Squire. I have seen journals say like we're going to be requiring iChecked. And then for conceptual frameworks, like these three are kind of the big ones, or sorry, these four kind of the big ones. I'm not really familiar with any major ones outside of these four. And Michaela, I'm happy to share the slides after. Any other questions before we move away from frameworks and guidelines for a little bit? We'll share some more examples and details of these towards the end of the talk if there's time. Okay. Cool. And Matt, this is you, I think.
Yes. So yeah, presenting data. This goes a little bit to what I think Jay was asking about. So data collection and evaluation, making sure that the data types that you're collecting, so quantitative versus qualitative, is consistent with your study type. So if you're doing a design project, but you're presenting on lots of implementation data like that, there's going to feel like this mismatch. So that's why going back to thinking about like what are the different frameworks and reporting guidelines help you align kind of your overall ethos. And then make sure your research question is aligned with the evaluation framework as well. So if you're doing a design project, but then you have an implementation framework or quality improvement project, but it's implementation framework, and there's that little bit of a mismatch, thinking about how you want to align these things is important. And then the results, make sure they actually address the problem. So if the thing you're trying to do is shorten length of stay, but then you're reporting on other measures like that, there's going to again be that little bit of dissonance. So make sure that the results that you're reporting aren't actually directly linked back to the problem that you stated in the problem statement. So outcomes, lessons learned, all of those things can be part of the results. It doesn't have to be a number. I guess that's the other thing that I want to kind of hammer home, is a lot of this is your experience as a frontline clinical informatics clinician. So learning from that experience, of like descriptions and qualitative stuff totally count as valid results for this type of report. And then yeah, if you do have figures, tables, make sure that they're clear, convey a message. Again, going back, it should align with the problem statement. Yeah, and then think ahead before you start implementing or start putting things into place. Think about where you can get your data from. I guess this is a little epic heavy, but same idea, data warehouse, but slice or dice, or like, where are you going to be able to pull your, your user adoption things from? Will it be a survey? Are there ways to kind of pull that in the background? Think about where you're going to get it, before you start, so you can, one, get a good baseline data, and then two, again, make sure you can pull the information easily. Again, I think we said this a bunch of times, but confirm your results are aligned with your problem statement. I think we are reiterating this because I think there's a lot of papers I've reviewed where they had cool results, but it didn't actually address the problem that they stated up front. So make sure that there is that alignment, and actually work backwards. So it's that whole thing of look at similar papers, similar proof of concept papers that have been submitted, and say like, okay, that's how they presented their data tables or their design diagrams, and then again work backwards from there. Claire, anything else from your side?
No, I think maybe just like as I was thinking of like maybe a more like a good example of how sometimes like the data type doesn't line up with the study type. So like if you said in a problem statement, we are going to look at a case series to determine the relationship between like cholesterol and like coronary artery disease, I'd be like, well, that's probably not going to be determined by a case series. Like that's a causal inference that you're making. And so that's not an appropriate analysis. And so that might feel a little bit more tangible to people. And that's really what the message we're trying to get across.
Cool. And again, just kind of an overcap of the data and results section. So again, we spent a long time talking through the different conceptual frameworks about it before you start doing a project, and to have all the data and try to retcon it. It's like this plan ahead is the other overarching message that we have here. Again, alignment, and then the type of results, it can be quantitative or qualitative. So I think that's the other thing too. I felt as a fellow, oh, we're doing informatics, it has to be like data and super data driven. It can be, but it's people, process, and technology. So that people part, that process part, that stakeholder engagement, how you did that stakeholder engagement and map to the process, that's all like very much in the realm of informatics. So it can be qualitative observations of, watching people, like user interviews, like watching people go through those things, 100% fair game. And again, same thing. We're not looking for causation or even new evidence generation. It's really inspiration. So even if you did quantitative data and it wasn't statistically significant, it still might be interesting, right? It's like if it's trending in a certain direction because your N was only 5 people that tried it out, give it a shot at least to submit, because I think there are ways that you can be a stepping stone for other people to learn and or be inspired to launch a larger trial at their place.
Mm-hmm.
No data too small.
And I guess one thing that I'll point out is like iChecked or Squire might feel like they're directing you much more towards like p-values and like hard data. And so in those times, like that might be a situation where you really lean on the conceptual frameworks to explore your findings. And that's totally okay. And this was just an example of like iChecked and how they sort of outline those necessary results. They say on their checklist that every component of this is mandatory. So really thinking about if this is what you're going to do, planning for how you're using your implementation tool and what kind of coverage it's providing, how you're exploring the outcomes and being very specific with what they're identifying in iChecked, having a section on lessons learned and unintended consequences. Unintended consequences is the one section that's not mandatory from iChecked, but it is something just practically that most, I would say like most or many journals are looking for, because this is really like something that helps with planning and being more honest about how your tool functioned at your institution. Matt, do you want to take this one too?
Yep. And then in terms of data visualization, so show and tell. I think like just because you collect, this is something that I tell our fellows, at least UCSF, just because you collected all the data doesn't mean you need to show every bit of data that you collected. So edit, learn how to like pick the point you want to make and then tell your story from there. Again, keep it simple, intuitive, labeling, large font. Again, tell a story. What's the like one key thing you want to have a takeaway from? And then really try to make that represent like the work that you did. You can always present the extra stuff in an appendix or in a follow-on. So pick that one clear message I think that you want to do. Again, particularly for these, a lot of times the word count is pretty small too. So it's kind of what is your one takeaway message, one or two takeaway points are the main things from there. And then just to, I guess, name drop places that I've found really helpful data viz things. Tufte and Few are like the two, Stephen Few, I think it's Ed Tufte, really interesting things on how to think about data visualization. So my approach to dashboards and everything else comes from them. Topic for another day, but those two are very helpful resources. Oh, Claire, you're muted.
Thanks. Wrapping things up, the classic discussion conclusion section. You know, for me, I think I try to spend the most time on my discussion section because I know as a reader, most people, including myself, are going to spend their time reading my introduction and my discussion. And it's very similar to the assessment plan. That's where the money is. That's where we show what we discovered. And so what you really want to do with these sections, or really the discussion section, is connect your case, your tool, your intervention to the known literature and fundamental concepts, and then share how you built on that work and how you explored the concepts that you mentioned at first in the introduction. So old knowledge, how you built on that knowledge, lessons learned, limitations, future direction. And that's kind of the classic script that I think most technical briefs or case reports follow, and would be like well received by reviewers and readers because they feel familiar. Matt, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that.
No, nothing more to add. Like I said, this is spend a lot of time when you're discussing an inclusion. Again, that's like kind of the purpose for taking the time to write something up.
And then similarly, like I think this might feel like a lot as you are going through and trying to describe what you want to do and what you did. As a first-year fellow, it might be that this is a totally new field and you haven't read a ton of technical briefs. And so I think that reviewing can be super helpful and really generate a lot of experience. And so we're going to spend some time advocating for you guys to all be reviewers for ACI Open or any other journal or conference. But from my experience, reviewing has helped me get insight into what other institutions are doing in the latest research. It's improved my own writing pretty dramatically because I'm critically reviewing others and seeing what the reviewers are looking for. Because as I'm reviewing, I'm trying to think, okay, what is somebody else going to pick up and what might I miss? And then also networking with future collaborators. That's how I met Matt and Jeff Nielsen, and it's been fantastic. There's lots of ways to serve as a reviewer. Certainly, a lot of journals have editorial fellows, and you can participate that way. That's what I do with ACI Open. You can also participate just by signing up on their website as a reviewer. You can tell Matt and I that you want to be a reviewer, and we will add you today. And then additionally, and maybe like really helpful and appreciated is when these conferences do come up like AMIA, they get tons of submissions from all over the country. They have a really high volume and they need people to be reviewing all of those submissions. And so that can be really sort of high yield, get you a lot of exposure in one go. Certainly being an effective reviewer takes time. And so one of the things that helped me when I started was I read through Matt's paper, I read through, I checked, And then I developed a Google template for what I was gonna look for with each paper and how I was going to provide feedback. And developing that template saved me a lot of time and improved my consistency. And then last plug for reviewing is that you will definitely have a better understanding of what your target journal is looking for. If you are hoping to publish with an ACI, then reviewing for ACI is going to give you a good sense of what they accept and what they reject. And so that can be a helpful strategy. As far as next steps and like ways to leave this talk and be productive, I think as a first-year fellow, you're just getting your feet wet. You're trying to figure out your program, figure out what projects you might want to do. But as you're starting to have those projects take shape, I would encourage you to make a writing timeline and have time booked within your calendar to look at CFIR, to look at CITIGs, to look at iChecked, but also to outline, all right, 1 o'clock on Tuesdays, I'm going to write, and it's going to be painful, but I'm going to do it every week. I love to also set submission dates and share that with the group. So if I'm working within a group of 5, I'm going to tell them, like, we are going to try and get this draft done by December, and we're going to try and submit December 15th. And so that becomes really clear. I do a lot of coaching on smoking cessation, and it's the same idea. You're going to set your quit date and you're going to share that with everyone, and it helps improve how likely you are to get to meet that deadline. And then just acknowledging that writing's hard and you really have to force yourself to write. The first draft is always rough, and I'm saying that on my 3rd iteration of a particular manuscript. That first draft was horrible, but it's part of the process, and that's totally normal, and you're not alone in feeling like a fraud.
Actually, go back if you could go back real quick. One other piece actually is kind of holding yourself accountable to writing, but also get a writing buddy. If you can tell, most of the things I write or co-present, I'm co-presenting with Claire. Jeff Nielsen and I wrote that paper collaboratively. So it's it's not just setting a time in my calendar, setting a time in our calendar that ends up being essentially working sessions. So just having that quarterly, or sorry, that Q2 week or QQ week check-in at least gets me to think about the project the 5 minutes before I'm logging into that Zoom meeting to work with them. So if getting a writing buddy also really, really helps kind of move that forward. And a lot of times it's as a fellow, you're collaborating with somebody else, and being co-first on a case report like this makes a ton of sense too.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say, just to tag on that, it's, if you're gonna be with a writing buddy, say we're gonna tackle the methods section over the next 2 weeks. We're gonna make it bite-sized. That's the best way to eat an elephant, as the saying goes, and just get words on the page.
Cool. And then just upcoming opportunities. So there's a lot of times I tend to do things sequentially too. Actually, the paper that I wrote with Jeff started out as I think a VCC presentation on how to write a case report. So put in for a poster, put in for a presentation for these, and then those kind of oftentimes become a paper or a case report down the line. So Informatics Summit coming up, HIMSS, Annual Symposium, and CIC next year. Actually, not Chicago, I think it's going to be Minneapolis, but a lot of options for these. And then you got to think 6 months ahead. All these lead times are just insanely long. So if you're working on something now, think about where you want to be submitting it to, probably 6 to 9 months from now. But yeah, keep an eye on it because these deadlines come up fast. And I will just verbally say, reviewing for conferences is so eye-opening. Like I said, I wish I didn't do it as a fellow. I wish I did. I think there's just a lot of information that you gain about the process by doing it. So anyway, I highly encourage people to sign up as reviewers.
And I'll just add that, call for participation or submission for a poster or a talk is going to close 6 to 8 months before the conference, which means they're going to be dying for reviewers around that time. So going to the event website usually is pretty easy to spot where they're asking for reviewer participation.
And then these are actually different places that have some sort of, as we said in the beginning, there's 10 million different names that they use for this. But everything from like New England Journal has stuff all the way down to ACI Open. There's a hierarchy, but like everything from New England Journal down through everything else. So keep trying, because if you get rejected from one, like keep trying. Many of my papers have gone through multiple sets of reviews and revisions and different journals. But yeah, every project has a home, so kind of even if they didn't get in the first, second, or third place, keep looking and check in with your mentors. I think that's the other thing too. So like you all have program directors and kind of saying like, hey, like we tried for these different places, where do you think this could go? Claire, anything else, I guess, in terms of your journeys of trying to get things in places?
I'll say that so I've mostly submitted to CI journals, but my mentors and I have also discussed submitting to like specialty journals as well. So that might be an avenue that you could explore, because maybe something that's familiar within the CI world is less familiar to pulmonary critical care. So that might be another avenue. And then every time that you get reviews, that's gold, because it's just going to make the next submission more likely to succeed. So those, reviewer twos are really painful, but they're going to help you get your journal into a home. And so then we were thinking we'd take questions, which Jay has one for us, and so we can tackle that. And then we can also go through some of the conceptual frameworks and reporting guidelines, if that's appealing to folks. Matt, I'll direct this one to you at first. He asked, how would you address branded technology? Do you avoid using branded names in the paper other than in the methods, or do you use the branded technology throughout the report?
Kind of depends on what you're using it for. I'm trying to think of a specific one.
I'll say for my papers,
Yeah.
We have mentioned Epic, which is our EMR at my institution, but we mention it once in the methods section, and then in the rest of the paper we say EMR, because I think generally I you want it to be generalizable, and most tools will be generalizable beyond one specific EMR. I think that's probably the most common branded technology difference. Ajay, do you have another example of maybe another branded technology?
Or I guess one, maybe, go ahead, Ajay, yeah, if you want to clarify.
Oh, I think that's a great example. I think a lot of the implementation work has to do with the branded technology for hospital implementation. So that was the frame of reference.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, and again, just to kind of reiterate the point, most technologies are not in a class of their own, they kind of fall under the umbrella of something, right? It's actually secure communication tools might be another one. So you have Tiger Text or Epic Secure Chat or other things. They're all secure communication tools. So you kind of just use the generic term, right? The umbrella term that it falls under. And then under your method, you say we used this specific one. But yeah, throughout the rest of the paper, genericizing it.
Jacqueline, you said, can you comment a little on the flavors of CI journals? Totally. I think so. ACI Open sort of is associated with ACI. I think as you go through these, you're going to probably look at the impact factors and see what has been a historical journal, what carries a larger impact. ACI is currently evaluated for an impact factor. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. ACI Open is a newer journal, so they're getting indexed and developing that impact factor, but it's not there yet. So that can kind of give you a sense of higher tier versus lower tier journals. I'll say practically on a CV, it's a big deal if you get like New England Journal of Medicine on your CV, but beyond that, I think people are just really excited to read your paper and it becomes less critical. Matt, I don't know if you have any other comments. Like JAMIA would be awesome. New England Journal would be awesome, but
yeah, I mean, impact factor is one way of measuring it. I think in this day and age where like most people don't even actually get the bound copy, like I've never held a bound copy of JAMIA in my hands. I think technically there is one. It's more about having it be available, right, in a reputable place, at least for me. I'm not up for tenure in a professorship track. So for me, I'm kind of more about like, how can we, particularly for these kind of things, right, like these case study type stuff, it's like, how can we get it in the hands of people that can use it? So for me, I tend to lean towards kind of the JAMIA opens, the ACI opens, the open access ones, just because again, the work that I think the frontline informaticists are doing is super important. How do we get that out there? That being said, they do count less if you're trying to get a professorship, but depends on what your overall goals are.
And offhand, like I know I have a medical student that's doing some like CI papers with me, and I'm like, okay, this might be like something I have to account for budget if I submit here versus here. So just peeking at those costs and figuring out like what's realistic for me to spend on this particular manuscript might be something to check that out as well. And then Matt, I don't know if you want to comment on Alex's question. I've had companies that we were told we couldn't use their name at all.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how, I mean, that's part of it too. It's like sometimes like the stuff that you're doing, like you might be held to a non-disclosure agreement, right? So it's possible that there's an NDA that won't allow you to publish that. So that's why, again, thinking ahead, planning for that. I'm trying to think as a reviewer, if someone said like, we used software X, but I can't tell you what that software was, how I would review that. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I don't know, Claire, I don't know from your standpoint, if you've ever reviewed anything like that. I think a lot of times if they don't want you to use their name, like you might not be able to publish on it. Yeah.
I know that Epic, when the like earlier in Epic days, different groups were trying to do sort of usability assessments and compare Epic to Cerner to different EMRs in a manuscript. And I think that was like not going to fly. And I think Epic said like you're not allowed to compare like EMRs against like our EMR against other EMRs. I don't know if that actually exists still, and I think I've seen some papers that sort of explore that. I think that if people were honest and we or sort of like said we compared like these 3 EMRs for their views, but you didn't actually label them as like Epic, Cerner, or I don't know, something else, then maybe you could get away with that. So it might be how you use screenshots or describe the tool. I think that if people said like in the methods, if you came up with a creative way to say like we were bound by non-disclosure agreements as we were approaching this study, but we used like this data visualization technique, that might fly. It probably depend on how you worded things. And then Adam, yes, for ACI Open, there is a discount code for fellows, and you can reach out to Matt or I, and we can help you get that. My co-fellow just got something through for ACI Open, and so I'm thrilled that I can get her code. It knocks the price down to like $80, maybe $50. I forget which
Somewhere
one,
between
but
50 and 80. Yeah, one of the UCSF
Yeah.
accounts similarly got theirs in. So basically, once you get it accepted, and they basically say if you want it published, pay us money. And this only applies for ACI Open. Again, full disclosure, where Claire and I both associate edit. Email one of us and we'll generate a code basically. But yeah, it comes out to less than $100 for what it's worth. So I don't know what the actual APC is. It's insane, like 1,500 or something really high.
Yeah. Let's see. We have about 10 minutes left. Any other questions? Otherwise, I can jump into some of the conceptual frameworks or reporting guidelines, if that's helpful. Or people can like have 10 minutes back of their day, so no pressure if you want to deck out at this point. But
And I'll verbally say if these slides happy to make available. I don't know, Claire, if you want to just email it to Hassan or whoever's
yeah,
managing this meeting.
Yeah, you can email it to me.
Awesome. So REAIM is a conceptual framework. Again, it's that big concept, big ideas, and it doesn't require every single element. So you might talk about implementation of a particular project at your organization, and that will give you some structure on how to do it. You might talk about the reach and how, like Justine last year, Morosak was, she had a digital ambassadors topic where she was exploring how digital ambassadors, like high school students and college students, were meeting with hospital patients to get them enrolled in their patient access portal and get them emails and get them enrolled in broadband access at their home. So how we're going to expand reach of patient portals to individuals. So REAIM is a great sort of broad tool to describe that. Here's some other examples. What's the likelihood that various components of the tool might be delivered as intended? And CIDIGS is another common one. This is a little bit broader. And for me, I was like, whoa, this is a lot. But again, like it doesn't require every component. You might just use CIDIGS descriptions of how internal organizational policies, procedures, and culture then influence your implementation of a socio-technical tool. SEEPS3, another one. This is one of their diagrams. Personally, don't love this diagram because I find it a little overwhelming. But same thing is the SEEPS3 process can help you think through how you want to explore implementation. So how does your patient enter the healthcare system? How does their information get integrated into the EMR? How does that diagnosis get communicated to them and to the rest of the team and facilitate treatment? But on a bigger scale, how are we exploring patient outcomes, system outcomes, and learning from that experience? And then one of my favorites, CFIR, just kind of breaks it down again. This is like a more detailed explanation for outer setting. So they give you this clean definition, the general setting in which the inner setting exists. And inner setting has its own definition in the resources for CFIR. They've got a great website that sort of breaks down each of these components, but it gives you a list of things that you might consider as you're thinking about your implementation tool. And again, like the CFIR is also nice because they have the big list that I sort of showed a second ago here. But then for implementation project, they have like a separate page on its own. And it can kind of tell you, all right, what's the antecedent assessment? What, you know, how likely was it that nurses were going to accept this QI project and find it appealing? And then what was the anticipated versus actual outcome? So I really like this framework for kind of projects that I think fellows would be approaching. Matt, I'll leave you to comment on this one.
Yep, and I put the links into each of the papers, particularly the I checked and these. And just I guess in transparency, when Jeff and I were putting this together, it was meant to be one as a guide to future writers, but to be honest, also a guide to reviewers as they're looking at case reports or technical briefs. So it's basically kind of you have the checklist that our reviewers are holding as well. So to Claire's point, it's like if you can say like, oh yeah, they included this in there. Did they mention a core concept? It is truly meant to be like check the box kind of thing. When we're doing this, but like I said, yeah, so ours, and again, I have a strong bias towards you don't have to have numbers for everything. So it's, if you don't have specific numbers, but like have a good description of the process. At least for me, I personally really wanted to, or Jeff and I both really wanted to say like, yeah, like the end, you know, like you're not gonna have a huge end for a fellows project, but you're gonna have really good close insights, and how can we capture that and make that usable and learnable for a wider audience.
And again, this is a reporting guideline. Again, I think Squire is updated, so I don't know why I keep writing 2.0, but Squire has a great website as well that makes it very digestible. Is a little bit more helpful when you have specific measured outcomes. So that might be one to check out if you do have like really good quantitative data. And just a screenshot of what theirs looks like. And then I checked DH, another reporting guideline, and this is just part of their like 19 components, 18 of which are mandatory. So it is like pretty aggressive. I think like when I was looking through it, I realized as a fellow that I often like didn't always have a great sense of budget planning, and so that might be a limitation that as fellows implementing other projects, it's worth considering and thinking about how you discuss that. But maybe for the scope of projects that we're approaching, might not always have like a clear budget to lay out. And so that was one of the reasons why I haven't used this one personally yet. Matt, I don't know if you have any comments.
Yeah, another thing, so mandatory is kind of a soft mandatory. Another way to think about it is like, at least tell me as a reviewer that you thought about it. You don't have to like do it. Like, so I don't need to see like a 18-page like budget plan and a, you know, P&L statement. But it's like, you know, say that like, you know, budget planning assessment like was not able to be done for X, Y, or Z, or like preliminary budget planning included proposed budget of X amount. So kind of just like show that you at least thought about it a little bit. But you can say like we thought about it and said it was out of scope. It is another way. Yeah, address it, but you don't have to provide a full budget.
I mean, there are like, you could describe something as like FTEs put into the project were X, and FTEs saved as a result of this project are Y. And I think that would probably meet the requirement. And this is just a recap slide. But all of these, I think, are worth checking out. Just don't feel compelled to read all of them because some of them are really long and very detailed.
I will say in like kind of our last minute, we kept this for the end because I'm sure it feels overwhelming. It should be, and you shouldn't have to like dive into this on your own as a fellow. Like, so I think and I really like the way that Claire laid this out, is she kind of said like, these are for implementation, these are for systems engineering, these are for human factors, these are for quality improvement. Find your local expert at your institution that does this, and like they can kind of be your Sherpa guiding you through the ins and outs and like exactly, you know, because basically each time you click, there's like a whole new set of words and new sets of things. So sort of find that person at your institution that aligns again with implementation science or systems engineering. Yeah, don't try to navigate this on your own, I guess is my my takeaway.
And I think that's the final slide that I have. So we're right on the hour, and I think we're done. But thank you so much for the questions and participation. Really, it makes it a lot more fun as a presenter.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt and Claire.
And I'll send you the slides today, Hassan.
Okay, awesome. Thanks everyone for attending.